are there certain techniques that you can use that are maybe less like traditional in a choral sense and maybe more solo, like vocal techniques and more pop vocal techniques? Absolutely. But like, that's what we're there for as music educators. It's, yes, we want them to have a choral experience, but we should want them to have a music experience as well. And I'm not saying that it needs to take over the entire program and your program is just about a show choir or just about pop music or just about Broadway music, but it's one of those things that can hook a kid and get them in that program.
Welcome to The Choir Baton, a podcast designed to engage with people and stories, ideas, and inspirations stemming from choir. No other art form, no sport, no hobby, no business requires a group of people to execute a communal goal with just their voices. Join me, your host, Beth Philemon, as I interview guests who are singers, teacher conductors, instrumentalists, and community members. Together, we'll ask questions, seek understanding, and share insight from our experiences in life and in choir. Hey, Choir Baton listeners, and welcome to episode 47 of the Choir Baton podcast. Today is an interview with my friend Rebecca Sabri, and Rebecca and I met where else but through Instagram. We've been following each other for several years now, and I reached out to Rebecca to talk about one of her passions, being show choir. Admittedly, we recorded this episode back in March, and I've kind of been waiting to release it for several reasons. The biggest one being not knowing what the fall was going to look like and thinking, man, this is a podcast episode where we are really championing we're championing show choir, but is this going to be, are we going to have show choir in the fall? And is this painful to put out a podcast where we did it in hopes that we would quote unquote be back to normal in the fall or not? And I've really been contemplating that. And also, so a couple other reasons, that I just wanted to make sure it was the right time for everyone. And this week, I was flipping through Instagram and I saw someone post something, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was, or else I would totally quote them, but it was something to the effect of innovating within choir, and it goes to what I believe is something that I try to preach about from a choir baton setting, is that there's no right way to do choir necessarily, or that in fact, the quote unquote right way to do choir is something that honestly should not look like we've always done it. And I think we can continue to innovate within this art form, and we all know right now we are being forced to innovate in a lot of ways. And what is choir, and how is choir being taught, and what is the best way, etc. There's the great virtual choir debate of 2020, where you had people standing up and shouting against virtual choirs for several weeks, and then you had people standing up and shouting that I'm doing a virtual choir the next couple of weeks. And then there's all these people and choirs that are somewhere in between. Eric Whitaker just released his virtual choir and talks about the beauty and power of it, but also acknowledging the fact of there's nothing like being in a room with other people and taking a collective breath and beginning to sing with one another. And I continued to think about how we can innovate and how we can grow as musicians and continue to be more inclusive. And in seeing this little Instagram post or comment or something to that effect that talked about how it's so important for us to think of choir in a myriad of ways. And while none of us could have foreseen necessarily a year ago, or quite frankly, even 6 months ago, that our school year would be starting off like it is, we can look for the fact that if we want choir to continue to grow, these are things we have to embrace. And I was so captivated with knowing that I had recorded this episode with Rebecca, because the same is true in what we talk about in this episode with show choir, right? As show choir has grown and evolved, there have been so many people that have said, and you'll even hear me talk about this in this interview, that show choir is not real choir. That was how I grew up, being taught about what choir is versus what choir isn't. And Rebecca and I talk about that within this episode. And I think that more than ever, this is an incredibly relevant discussion for us to have, because whether we're talking about show choir or virtual choir or jazz choir or madrigal choir or gospel choir or, all of the other different types of so-and-sos like choirs, who are we to say what choir is and what it isn't? And who are we to not support the efforts of others in promoting more people singing? And I am just really excited to share this episode with you with that mindset. It's going to be a year of open minds, but we can't really have open minds if we don't have open hearts. So if you are struggling with having an open heart about what this next year will unfold for us as music educators, then I challenge you to listen to this episode and let this example of the perception of show choir remind you that just like there's amazing music happening in show choirs and it looks different from other choirs, similarly, there is going to be amazing music to be made virtually, and even though it's going to look different. So thank you to Rebecca for being a guest on the Choir Baton podcast. A little update, her show choir, because I actually just got off the phone with her a little bit ago, her show choir, because they are a private show choir, is holding rehearsals, and they are doing certain protocols of major distancing because they are a private company. They can uphold things differently than in a public school setting. All of her singers are wearing masks, etc. And I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you reached out to her with more specifics. I'm purposely not sharing specifics on here because I think there's many other resources and places where you can get specifics, and that's not my niche that I am choosing to lean in on for many, many, many reasons. You do you, as the saying goes. But I did want to give you that little bitty update, and they're, of course, continuing to watch that as well. Also, just some fun little Choir Baton family news. If you have not seen her Instagram announcements, her and her husband are expecting their first child, which is very exciting for them as well. One last little detail before I turn you over to this interview is the fact of, if you've been around Choir Baton, you know I have something called the Choir Baton Teaching Membership. And there's 3 different ways you can join it financially. Is one on a month-to-month basis, one is a 6-month basis, and another is a year basis. All of that's available on the website, but what you get with that is essentially PD at your fingertips whenever you want it, whenever you need it. And the Choir Baton Teaching Membership is what I wanted and needed as a classroom teacher, where when I need to think through and watch someone and how they teach rhythm, or what's their approach to teaching melodic contour and sight singing or score study, anything like that, I wanted to be able to go in and watch that, and also in a curated fashion. Can you find a lot of that stuff on YouTube? Absolutely. But I really wanted a curated source, and simultaneously I wanted corresponding worksheets that went with it that enabled my singers to practice and also enabled them to be assessed on that as well. I also taught singers that had extreme experience with music and singers that had 0 experience with music. And I wanted something that approached it at a unique and different way that was atypical, so that even that experienced music student was having to go at it from a different angle, and that was less of equity gap between equity in this term of equity of music instruction, that they could approach that learning from a more equalized or equitable rather platform, because it is a little different. And so that's what you get as a teaching member. In addition to support from me, I love to have calls with teaching members and support them in ways in which I can help them think through things, etc. So that is actually available now, and I am closing the doors to new members at the end of August. So at the end of August, you will not be able to join the teaching membership, depending on, it'll either be a January or end of next school year release for that. And so the reason being is I really just want to hone in and focus on the teachers that are in the teaching membership and help us move along a bit together through the year versus new people joining each month. So I'm trying it out. We'll see how it goes. That's the beauty of doing my own thing here. And I just know that it's going to be really helpful for all of us. So if you're interested in joining the teaching membership, please try it out. You can even try it out for a month and then drop it if you do the month to month. Or I hope you'll stay with us and continue to be a part of the Choir Baton teaching membership. That financial commitment supports all of what Choir Baton does. I could go into more of that, but I want to get you to this episode, and let's enjoy this interview with my friend, Rebecca Sabri. Well, welcome, Choir Baton listeners, to another podcast episode of the Choir Baton podcast. I am here with Choir Baton taker over holder. I've still got to work on how I should call that. But Rebecca Sabri.
Yes.
Sabri.
Yes, Sabri.
Yes. I practice every time, and then I get on here and I'm like, it goes poof out of my brain. I guess I could be a real choral musician and IPA it out, but let's be real, I'd probably say it wrong even with the IPA in front of me. But welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Rebecca is a choir director in Ohio, and a couple of things I want to preface with this is, one, when she signed up for a takeover, she's like, I do show choir and a competitive show choir. Is that okay if I showcase that? And I was like, absolutely. Choir is choir is choir. But I also understood her sentiment for asking that, because there is within our choir community, there is this thing of being, well, show choir is not real show choir, is not real choir. And before you stop and press pause or clip to a next episode because you're like, yes, I agree with that, let me be real with you and tell you I was in that camp. That's how I was raised. That show choir is not real choir, and that real choir is the best choir, and that's the only choir. And I became saved. I'm just kidding. When I was in my student teaching program, and I'm sure Rebecca might agree, and if you don't agree, we'll talk about this, but that there are bad show choirs just like there are good show choirs. There are bad regular choirs just like there are good regular choirs, and you can't let your experience with one influence your overall opinion of all of it. And so my experience with show choir in high school and my mentality of that was influenced off of one or two people's opinions on bad experiences with show choir. And when I got to my student teaching, my high school placement was in a high school. In fact, if you've ever been to Nashville, Tennessee, and you've ever been downtown in Nashville on Broadway, right just a block up from the honky tonks is this beautiful Hogwarts looking school. And it's just beautiful, and it's called Hume Fogg, and that's where I student taught. And that is my first exposure to show choir there with Lisa Forbes, who is just the bomb. An ironic, weird choir connection. Her dad was a lifelong choir director, and I think GCA, I could have researched this better before, but at William Jewell College. So she has these choral roots within there, but she did an amazing show choir in addition to concert choir at her school. And that experience forever changed my mindset about what show choir is and why I am so passionate about it and willing to like stick up for it, I guess, in a sense, when people have the mentality that I did. So that's a lot of me talking. People don't care about my story, but I did want to preface it to know, like, I'm a convert. I still think there's bad show choirs, but there's also really good show choirs out there. And I'm excited for you to tell us a bit about that, Rebecca. Again, welcome.
Hi. So just about like good show choirs, bad show choirs, good, bad, ugly.
I mean, we can jump right into the meat of it. Yeah. What is a good show choir?
Well, I mean, a good show choir doesn't differ that much from a good regular choir.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. Absolutely. Like, I mean, yes, you have other elements. You have choreography elements. You have costume elements. Sometimes there are props. You have an entire combo, entire band behind usually. So you have all these other elements that can enhance, but sometimes may not, the singing. But at the end of the day, good singing is good singing. And I mean, you can still teach good technique. Are there certain ways that you would sing quote unquote show choir music, which tends to be pop, Broadway, movie music heavy? It does, because that's like you tell stories through it. You show
Right. It's a little hard to add choreography to Sikut Chergus.
Absolutely. I don't think that's what Palestrina intended.
Although, what was it? I think it was like the Lagermaid, the LA Master Chorale did that really, I don't know if you saw, and this sounds really like nerdy of me, but like they did this whole like choreographed thing of this whole musical work that you never know. Anyways, side note, keep going.
But so are there certain techniques that you can use that are maybe less like traditional in a choral sense and maybe more solo, like vocal techniques and more pop vocal techniques? Absolutely. But like, that's what we're there for as music educators. It's, yes, we want them to have a choral experience, but we should want them to have a music experience as well. And I'm not saying that it needs to take over the entire program and your program is just about a show choir or just about pop music or just about Broadway music, but it's one of those things that can hook a kid and get them in that program. And then it's like, hey, well, you're in show choir, but our requirement is you have to be in a concert choir as well. So do you want to be in men's chorus or women's chorus? Or do you want to be in our mixed ensemble as well? And then they have that quote unquote fun in the show choir where they're still working hard. They're still learning to read music. They're still learning to balance and blend. They're still learning to like sing harmony, sing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts. If it's done, I would want to say in the best way possible.
Right.
But they also are being given that, I don't want to say requirement, but a requirement to, yes, this is fun, but let's also have you in a concert choir where you're also going to learn these other things you're not going to learn in a show choir.
Right. I think that's so huge. And a lot of people, that is their holdup, right? Like, why am I going to have a show choir? And we're also not saying you need to go out and start a show choir in your school right now as either. Like, again, this is just an opening conversation. If you do want to, we'll talk some more about that. But like, that's an important component, that having a show choir does not have to detract from your other choirs.
Oh, absolutely not. My high school choir experience as a student, we had a competitive show choir when I was in it, and I was only in it for 3 years. Like, it was that competitive. Like, not everyone made it.
Right.
Like, didn't make it all 4 years. But we also had an amazing concert choir experience as well. We had a beginning concert choir. We had men's and women's choruses. We had a symphonic choir that was mixed, and like we would go in Ohio for OMEA, which is our Music Educators Association. We would go to contest or festival or whatever people call it, and we would go the highest class and we would get top ratings every year because that was what was expected. But we also had this other thing that we all wanted to be a part of that was fun, that was competitive, that was different, but we didn't take concert choir less seriously. But I also attribute that to my choral director's like guidance in that he didn't make show choir the only thing that was important to him. He realized that you had to have equal you had to have equal weight in both of them.
Right. One informs the other. They're not devoid of each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that too is what, what's also funny is I'm sitting here as I like gave my rant about Lisa and choir. Like you're gonna laugh. I also taught show choir for 3 years. I forgot to even share that. Okay, Beth. But I learned so much about that too. And I think what some people think is that with show choir, you lose all of the music literacy, or you lose this, or you lose that. And that, again, they both inform each other. And that when you do see what one person might call bad, another person might call good show choirs, but so a show choir that you could debate on its influence on choral music, that there is an influence there, traditional choral music, it's that when those elements are missing from a show choir experience.
Yes, absolutely.
So with the show choirs that you know and have worked with and been in, have you always had attendance in a show choir or involvement in a show choir or have you always had attendance in a quote unquote traditional choir be a prerequisite for being in show choir?
The only place that is not the case is where I'm currently at with the community show choir. Clearly, like if it's community, well, I mean, we do have other obligations, like they do sing like some patriotic music during the summer. We sing Star Spangled Banner at like some baseball games and things like that. So there are more traditional elements, but a lot of those kids are in choir at their school, but then we do have some that aren't. Like, they might not have time in their schedule during the school day for choir at school. Sometimes, I mean, it's rough to say their choir programs aren't, tip top, and they really want to, enhance choral music experience somewhere else. And, I have kids that would probably say that about my choir program at my school, just because we're a lower income school, but it's a different, thing with the community group. Clearly.
Right.
But everywhere else that I've been, where I was in high school, where I student taught, and then where I am currently, where I'm currently at is a little different, and I'll explain that in a second. But yes, it's been a requirement to be in a school day choir in addition to like a regular school day concert choir in addition to the show choir. I have some students right now that are a part of our career center, like our technical vocational school, and they want to be in choir, but they can't be there during the school day because they have to be at the vocational school. So I have a couple kids that is, it's like I'm a little looser on it, but what I did for that, this year, is all of those kids that are in that situation, they still came with us to contest and they sang with our concert choir. So they still had that concert choir experience, even if it was just for one concert. Right. And they still had the sight reading part of that. They still had the preparation for that. So, and it's the first time that they've gone to contest in over 30 years, that's a whole other thing.
I know, we can talk about that too. Yeah.
That too, but they still had that concert choir experience. So I am more okay with the fact that they were not in a school day choir, because they can't be, but I don't want to deprive them of that opportunity, which Absolutely. Prior to my getting there was very common. It's like, oh, you're going to the career center, so you can't be in choir anymore. Sorry. And I'm like, that's just so crappy. Like, you can bend the rules a little bit.
Right. I totally can see that. And I love getting kids involved, particularly in those extenuating circumstances. That's really key. I have a couple more questions about school choir, and how like you're incorporating show choir within that, but I'm really interested about this community show choir experience, because it's something I really didn't know was a thing, quite frankly, until you were talking about it. Community choir is one of my jams, but sorry, go ahead.
It's not really a thing.
Okay.
Really cool. Honest. If my husband was out here, he knows. He's not a music educator, but he went to performing arts high school here in Akron. And he was in the show choir that I direct. He was in it for 9 years. They had little baby show choir, like for elementary school students all the way through high school. So he was in it for 9 years. He got me back into the world of show choir, believe it or not. I was just teaching regular choir. And then we started dating. He's like, oh yeah, I'll tell you a story in a second. about how we met, and actually how we probably should have met years before we met, but he knows all about like the community show choirs that have popped up and that have failed and everything. But
Right.
The organization I work for, ETC, which stands for Energy, Talent, and Commitment, which is super cute.
Yeah.
It's been in existence for 42 years, which is not common for community show choir groups. I think the next most senior group might be around 10 years old, because it's the sustainability. We don't have feeder programs. We have the choirs in the area. My husband is the general manager for the organization, and he emails every choir director in the area, and no one gets back to him, because I don't know, and I don't really know why. Like, we don't really know why they don't get back to us. And he and I have talked about it. I feel like a lot of band directors want their kids to go perform underneath other band directors, as opposed to choir directors. We are very, very picky about who our kids sing under, because we want to make sure it's the same techniques that we use, or the same, like they use the same vowel formations or the same whatever. So we're really picky about letting our kids go somewhere else. And which I get, because I am the same way. So I've told my husband, I was like, you know what, if I was not involved in this organization, and all of a sudden this outside organization was like, hey, give us your kids, I'd be like, who are you? but so it's like, it's also, even though we've been around for 42 years, our presence in the community has declined, which we're working on. But that's another reason why these choir directors won't send us their kids, because they're like, who are you? Or it's like the whole show choir stigma, like, oh, I don't want my kids doing show choir, or they might have a show choir in their school and they don't want this to take away from their show choir, which is fine. I think, like, you know, we don't have a ton of competitive show choirs in the same area as us, but we never try to like reach out to those schools. Like a couple of the schools around here that have big competitive show choirs, Twinsburg, Solon, Medina, we never try to go out there and are like, hey, come join our show choirs. Like, they have a show choir. If they don't make their show choir and they want to try ours out, that's fine. But if they have a show choir at their school, we want them to do that. We're here for those kids who don't have that experience. And then we have a lot of schools in the area that don't have a show choir, that don't have even what I have at my school, which I call a little baby show choir, like where it's not competitive. And even there is a school in the area, they have a non-competitive show choir. And then we have students from that school that do that, and they also do our competitive show choir, because we try our best. We have like 17 schools, but we try not to have anything conflict. Like, our rehearsals are Sunday afternoons or Saturday afternoons, depending on how old the kids are, what group they're in. But we really try to be accommodating to those other programs. So it's hard, because the sustainability of it is not really there. Like, when you really think about it, we get our kids by word of mouth. We might get kids from seeing a community show. We'll do our show just at like random like street fairs and festivals throughout the fall, but that's a whole fall. That's in fall, and then they have to remember us till it comes spring. Mm-hmm. So we're not the sustainable program like you are in a school district. So
okay, I'm gonna stop you, because you just hit on like so many major points. I kind of want to circle back through them again. I'm like, okay, I mean, you're just throwing out wisdom and nuggets of knowledge, like right and left. So let's pause for a second before my brain explodes, because of all of what you're saying, and like how much we need to hear that. It's like, first, your acknowledgement as we as choir directors are stingy about farming our kids out.
Myself included. Like, right. I can't deny that.
So why do you think that is? Well, you kind of talked about it, but let's go there first.
I mean, I think it's because we are so invested in the personal development of each child's voice, and like how they are an intricate part of our department. And then if they go somewhere else, they might not have that same experience. They might be more or less important to somebody else. And we know exactly what their value is to us. And we want to make sure that they know that from us. And we don't want them to have a bad experience.
Right. Right.
And so like, I mean, like one of the things that I've come to like see, and I get it, but I don't, because I'm not a kid anymore. But like, I'll have kids that will audition, mostly girls. Clearly, like that's never a problem. Finding girls is never a problem. But I'll have a girl come in and she'll be like, oh, I sing soprano, and I'll make her an alto and her world will be crushed.
Oh,
and so it's like, honey, it's your value is not determined on whether you're a soprano or an alto. And I try to say, well, I think you would like, you're a strong enough singer that you can sing alto. And like,
and the ranges are the same, and your voice is not developed, and you can sing. Yeah, sorry, that's my.
Oh yeah, no, I totally get it.
My wheelhouse.
But they come in with this preconceived notion from wherever they've come from, voice lessons or another choir program, and then like it's changed because I am not the same person as their choir director. Another thing that I have seen up in this area where I'm from, or where I'm living right now, they like a lot of hard inner consonants, like little, and that drives me up a wall. I'm like, no, it's little. You don't say the word little, you say little most of the time. So like and I always tell them, I'm like, that's what I want. That might not be what your choir directors want at school, but that's what I want. So please stop.
Right.
And so it's just like this, there's so many little intricacies that we as choir directors, like we are just so different on them. And there's so many of them that it's probably almost impossible for people to line up exactly that rather than.
It is. I would say it is impossible. Yeah.
I think that we're like, no, we just want you to be here. My experience is the best for you. Like, shut it down.
Right.
Like that's
because it's less work for us if we have to pick, and it makes us have to be even more articulate and even more aware of what decisions that we do want, right? Because you have to know going into something that sound that you want, and sometimes we as sound makers or like crafters can then fall into that trap of it just is what it is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's
so
fascinating.
I think that's also a big proponent of also why people don't necessarily want to do show choir either, because they have to challenge themselves as music educators to do something other than a traditional choral sound.
Right.
My personal opinion, though, clearly.
Like, oh no, I get it. I mean, I get it completely. Absolutely. Okay. So that is a huge thing for us to like, as if we could end it right there and you could think on that for days, Choir Baton listeners, and be like, oh, wait, how am I? What am I? Or, but then let's also then address this like community aspect of getting community involvement. I love one thing that I am really passionate about, and I keep hearing stories of successful organizations like yours that have been around for a long time, even though I know that at times you're struggling with numbers, is that you have identified a need and you are working to like fill that need, and you have your why established as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, and the biggest thing is this, like I said, this organization is 42 years old. So in the late 70s, like show choirs were just starting. There's a whole book about the history of show choir, which my husband has somewhere. It was actually co-written by one of the choreographers our group used to have. He's no longer a choreographer now, but it's called Blood, Sweat, and Jazz Hands. Yes, it's an amazing title. I can't remember the person who's definitely the author, but
yeah.
Co-written by Mike Weaver is one of the show choir choreographers that helped write that. But it's a whole history of it. But like these show choirs, they were coming around in the 70s. So like it was definitely not a thing, before that. I mean, I'm sure it was somewhere someone came up with something like this but just didn't maybe call it that.
Right.
But so it's been in the community since the 70s. And like I said, we don't have a ton of competitive show choirs in the area. And I think it was about probably early 90s, mid 90s, is when our organization decided to go from just a community group that did, it was a 6 through 12 choir. And then they just did like a 30-minute set or 30 or 45-minute set where it was just sixth graders through 12th graders singing and dancing. And then at some point in the like early mid 90s, competitive show choir stuff started happening. And then they got on that wave, and who is the man who is now our executive director made that decision that we were going to be more competitive. And then they've just ridden that wave since, and we haven't backed down from the competitive side. But the fact that it's been 42 years and we're still filling a void is, I think, speaks volumes. So I don't know if it's because people are like, oh, well, we can just send our kids to ETC, or if people just really are that, I don't want to say anti-show choir, but they're not in tune with what show choir can be.
Right.
It does take a lot if you want to have a good show choir, in whether it's competitive or non-competitive. It takes time, and our time is so valuable. And I think especially when you get into the things as far as like people being a part of a relationship or part of a family, like, are you willing to spend your time being with other people's kids,
right,
as opposed to your own family?
Right.
So I know that, I mean, that's a big proponent of it too.
Absolutely. Well, and you alluded to this a little bit before, right? Like a big part of your involvement in show choir has then stemmed from the relationship with your husband.
Yes, absolutely.
So how did y'all meet?
Okay, so let's get a story time here.
Yeah.
So we actually met online. We met on OkCupid 5 years ago in July. And so we've been married for 2 years this past January. And so we were like, you know, he sent me a message. I was like done. I was like, I'm not going to date anymore. Like, I'm done. And he sent me a message right before I like logged off my account. And I was like, oh, this guy seems nice. So we talked a little bit. And then look at his profile, and his says something about show choir. And I'm like, show choir. And then come to find out, he was in the show choir that I now direct, ETC, which I knew of when I was in high school because we're both in Ohio. We're both from Ohio. And I'm like, wait, like, I've competed against ETC. He's like, yeah, I know who you are. I'm like, what? Because he and I are the same age. We both graduated in 2005. Our senior year, I had a solo, like the opening song of the show. And there was like a fake piano that I stood on top of, and I was the soloist. So like people knew who I was. And like,
I need a picture of that for that to be the cover of your episode.
Okay, I will send you the video too. You can see that too. It's on YouTube. But so he's like, yeah, I know who you are. And I'm like, that's a little creepy, but I'll go with it. And came to find out that he and I had been at so many show choir competitions as high schoolers, and we never met. Not once. He knew kids that I was in show choir with from my high school. He's like, oh, Shane and Matt and Michael. I'm like, yeah, I graduated with all of those kids. Like, it was like mind blowing. And it was just like, we had this thing, literally our first date was dinner, and that's all we talked about was show choir. And I hadn't been around show choir since my student teaching. So it had been a long time. And like we had like gone, like my sister was in the show choir too. She's 3 years younger than me, but I was at a couple of the competitions that she was at, and he was there too, but we never met. It's just, it's this crazy like universe thing.
That is so crazy. And oh, like, my goodness.
Like all of our friends are just like, you're a show choir power couple. And we're like, okay, like we'll do that. We'll say that. But
did you do a routine at your wedding?
No. So no, say my husband's actually like, if he's up like with a group of people, he's great singing, dancing, like, but he's not like a solo person. Yeah. Like he's like, oh, I'll sing and dance with other people, but not by myself.
I love that. Well, but then again, that's like such a testament to, we talk about people that feel comfortable singing in a choir versus having a solo. Same thing with singing and dancing, feel comfortable doing it with other people. Exactly. Yeah. And not doing that. So I want to break it down now that we have like convinced people that show choir is good for your choir program, is not all bad, and that you can meet your future spouse if you're involved in show choir. Let's break it down. If someone has like never had an experience with show choir, and granted, there's like different components of it, because in how I've taught it, and then in student taught it, it's also a little bit different. But for you in your show choir world, what goes into show choir?
Well, I touched on a little bit. It's a lot of your time. It's you have to realize that what you put in is what you get out.
Right.
And it's definitely, for me, like I said, I have a show choir at school, which is non-competitive, and they would probably be okay in a couple years if I wanted them to go that way, but I'm still building that program. But the biggest thing for them is funding, because it costs a lot to do.
Right.
Because like, for example, where I'm at ETC, I'm going to throw the number out. It's $1,700 for them to do show choir.
Right.
For some people, that's a great deal, because when we talk to like parents who like do competitive dance or travel baseball, they're like $1,700 and it covers all of their travel and their costumes and their hotel rooms. Like, they're like, that's a deal. But then you have, like I said, like my kids at my school are low income. It's an astronomical number that they never think they're going to ever reach.
Right.
Though we have fundraising opportunities and we have payment plans, they're like, there's no way.
Right.
But so, but as far as like getting to that,
yeah.
like,
but that's a huge thing to also consider, though, is that it is a financial investment. And first, I love how you address that, right? Like, for some people, it is okay, you just want that one time sort of thing, versus other times they can't fathom that. So the money that goes into it is huge, because then there is the music, there's the choreography, there is the rehearsal, there's the costumes, there's the band.
Absolutely. And like so like when you're in a school setting, clearly like the cost of your director is covered by the school's salary. But in the community show choir world, like I'm not getting paid a full salary. I'm getting paid like a nice stipend. Like, if you're basing it on like a teacher salary, it's a decent stipend, but I'm there every Sunday. I'm there 4 or 5 weekends out of the year for competitions. That might include Fridays. And then we're getting home super early on Sundays, like, 2 a.m. And then we have community shows that are, on Saturdays during the fall. We have a holiday show. So are teachers ever compensated correctly? No, but it's definitely not in the community, in my community show choir world.
Right.
And unless it's built into your like salary schedule, your stipend schedule, it's never going to be enough. And even if it is, it's probably never going to be enough. But you have to realize that it's, like I said, what you put in is what you are going to get out. But as far as like the costs, like you have the overhead for the teacher salary in a school district, you don't have to worry about that unless you're getting a stipend and you want a stipend. But then like you also have to pay a choreographer, and like I have kids at my school who do the choreography for my school show choir, and that's great for what we do. But if you're going to be ultra competitive, it's not ideal. Like you want to get somebody who knows more about the competitive circuit. You're going to want to, if you can afford it, hire one of the big names.
Right.
And they range. Like sometimes you'll get someone who's like, oh, it's $1,200 a song. Sometimes it's $1,500 a day. And if you're doing like a workshop camp during the summer, like it gets expensive, because then you're also covering travel if they're coming from out of state, and room and board if they're not local. Right. And then you're also getting costumes. These costumes are usually custom made. You can get them from places like Rivers, Dance Sophisticates, these places that are like factories that like churn them out. But sometimes there are so many people that use them that things get behind. Then you also have people that
the first day of my show choir of ever having it, I'm like literally breaking out in hives thinking about it. We ordered dresses from Rivers. They were like tailored, like we measured to the girls. I'm like 21, 22, have no idea what I'm doing, have fielded emails from parents about how expensive this $138 dresses were, which I'm not saying they weren't expensive, and I'm not saying they were expensive. I'm saying that's a whole other subject. But then they literally came in the day of the concert, and I've never been so glad that, because of that back order thing, and I've never been so glad that they have fit those girls and they look good. But the beautiful thing is that they were covered in glitter. And let's see, that was 2009, so 12 years ago. I think that theater teacher is probably still picking up glitter from that auditorium.
Oh, absolutely. And then if you use someone who's custom, like more expensive, like there are a couple people out there, Diane Holbert, Gail McGinnis, Caulfield and Company, Diana Caulfield, like their costumes, like we were looking at using one of them for the All Americans, the group that I directed, and we were looking for 2 dresses initially. We didn't go with her, unfortunately. They're going to be $250 a piece. And our budget was like $375 for everything for each kid.
Right.
So it's just, you have to realize it's going to be expensive. And then you can have sets like when that costs money too. You do, if you have an extensive combo, a backup band, ideally it's students in your school, or for us, we pull them from the community. For my kids at my school, we use the tracks that come with our music from JW Pepper, because that's what we do, and it's easier, and that we're not competing. If you're competing, you can't have backing tracks.
It has to use live music. How long are the competition sets?
Competition sets, well, usually your slots for a competition range from 25 to 30 minutes. So but that's like getting everything on stage, all of your sets, all of your costumes, your entire band. Right. And so like from beginning to end, getting it all on and getting it all off, you have like between 25 and 30 minutes. So your set needs to be shorter. So ours usually range around like 17, 18, 19. So we have like a 12-minute leeway or so.
Right.
Get everything on and off. And we have kids that are in our crew. We have dads that help with crew, and they just make that so efficient, because if they weren't efficient, like you get time penalties and stuff like that in the competitive world, which is like, once again, if you're not doing competitive, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But then you have to decide what you want to do as a director. Do you want to be competitive? If so, that's great. But you have to realize if you want to be competitive just for them to have fun, do whatever you want to do. Right. But if you're really invested in it being competitive, and then making finals, and then potentially getting a first place at certain places, it takes time, it takes money, it takes all of that stuff, not just from you, but from the kids and from their families.
Right.
And it takes time. You're usually not going to, your first year out, go out and bring home a championship.
Yeah.
Or make finals then.
Which then brings it to that comment that we were talking about on our Instagram Live right before we popped on here, is that like when people say, oh, you do show choir, people go, oh, your life is just like Glee.
No.
How frustrating is that to like combat some of those stereotypes, even from the non-musical community, about what you do?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily frustrating anymore, just because this is my 10th year teaching, and like, I'm like, oh, it's not really like that. I'm just very pleasant about it. And I'm like, I usually, if like we're having a community show, I'll be like, oh, well, like, you should come to this and like see what show choir is really about. Or like, I'll pull up a quick show choir video. That's what my go-to was for a long time, because there was like, especially in like college, like and I love my college choir director so much, but he would just rag on show choir. And I'm pretty, like, first Halloween as like a freshman, I wore my show choir dresses, like to like just like get at him a little bit. And like, and all the kids were like, oh, you're the show choir girl. I'm like, yep, I am. And so like, and it was always just in fun, but like once YouTube came around and like show choir was on YouTube, like, which was like halfway through my college.
Likewise.
A little bit. So
no, I'm right there with you.
But so we, so that would be my go-to. I'd be like, no, you like need to see it. Like, this is what like show choir is to me. Like, it's not just jazz hands and bop steps and everything.
It's not just one hand or like two hands or a couple jazz
there, or like,
right.
So, and if that is what you do, that's great. That's fine. That's especially because if that's what your kids want and that's what's best for your kids, like I've said, like my school show choir is very much that. And I was talking to my husband, because this is my 3rd year at my school and my 2nd year doing the high school groups at ETC. And some of my kids at my school get a little weird. They're like, you have other students, like you do another show choir, and they get very insecure about it, because, and I'm like, guys, I don't want you to be like that. And for a long time, I was like, why are they weird? Why are they weird? And my husband was like, well, have you ever told them that you want them to be there too? And I was like, I don't think I have. And that just actually kind of broke my heart and made me kind of like upset with myself. And so like, this is before all this crazy coronavirus stuff.
Right.
Like we had a conversation because it was the weekend that I did the takeover. I did stuff with them, and then I did stuff all weekend with ETC, but the ETC had won that weekend. And so I came back that week and talked to all of my kids, and I was like, hey, look, like, I know some of you know that I do this and I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want you guys to be offended that I do go somewhere else and that they're good. I was like, them being good doesn't mean that you're not good. And like, kind of like someone else's success does not mean that you're a failure. And just like preaching over here. But I told them, I said, I hope you guys know that I would love for you guys to be in that. I know the biggest thing, like I've said for them, because I teach in a low income district, is the money. Right. And I told them, and I said, I know you don't believe me that this money thing can be worked out, but it can. And I want you to be there. I want you to audition if you want to do this. And they were like, that's all we ever wanted you to say. And I just like felt so bad because I was just trying to like not say anything and like not hurt their feelings. But like, and that's what I would say to people who are like, you know, in a similar situation. Like if you have a show choir and you're not sure if you want to take them competitive, ask your kids, what do they want? Like, do they want it to stay the same? Like my kids at my school, they want it to stay the same where they're at. But they also, because I do have a competitive show choir that I'm a part of, like I want them to know that they have that opportunity too, just not necessarily at school, but they can still do it even though it's not at school. So like, that's,
I love that.
So, but just like, my kids just like made me like realize, I mean, your kids always do, your students always like make you realize so many things that you never even like think about.
They are our teachers, that is for sure. And I think that's, so interesting that you were able to realize that, like through your husband. I wouldn't have necessarily realized that either. I think that's a completely natural thing. So I hope you are not too hard on yourself about that. But like also they appreciate it now too, because that's not something you've always been saying. Like it's a part of your journey being at a new school with new kids too.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were just, but, and then now with all this coronavirus stuff, it's like, oh, well, are we going to do some auditions or what? So, but we're probably doing video submissions, cool. Which for honestly may make some of my students at my school audition because they don't have to, it's about a 40-minute drive from our school to where the community show choir is. So if they don't have to drive all that way for an audition, they might be more apt to try out. So we'll see.
I love that positive spin on what we're all kind of experiencing. Well, listen, as we kind of close out here, I'm curious, what have you seen as an educator, conductor, and then also as a singer? What benefits has being involved in show choir in any and all of those capacities been for you as a quote unquote traditional choir singer, and that you've seen for your kids as they go back and forth between the two too?
Well, I know for me personally, one of the biggest things that it's helped me with is just being a more emotive singer, just like really connecting with the music, because you can't get up on that stage in a sparkly dress and, you know, sparkly tie or whatever, and dance and move around and not have some sort of emotion. Like, I mean, you can, but then you look really weird. But you have to have some sort of emotion on your face. You have to figure out how to connect to the music and how it connects with the movement that you're doing and like where you're going next. And if you're telling a story, whereas like if you're just standing and singing, you don't necessarily think about that all the time. We try to get our students to think about that, but it's like pulling teeth, at least with my kids it is. And so if you're moving, at least that gives you something. You're moving some part of your body. Now maybe move your eyebrows a little bit, move your face, make it look interested. I don't know. So it's like, for me, that was a really big thing. And I think like, and we still struggle even like with that with the kids at ETC. We still have kids that they don't know how to emote. We have these big, huge mirrors in front of them when they learn dancing. And then we're like, okay, now you have to have like a face. You can't just like do the dance moves, like have like, you know, a stonewall face. You have to look excited. You have to be engaged. And then I think as far as like what my students have gotten out of it is like from a traditional choral sense is that they're more invested in choral, like traditional choral music, because of the fact that I give equal weight to both the show choir and the concert choir. That's the biggest thing for me. Like before I got to my school, Spartan Airs, that's our little show choir, Spartan Airs were like, oh, I want to be in Spartan Airs. I want to be in Spartan Airs. I want to be in Spartan Airs. And now that I've been, Spartan Airs is still, it's my best singers. It's the kids I trust the most. But those kids are also usually in symphonic choir. And symphonic choir, I make sure that they have like this really hard, impressive rep. And I give them just as much weight. And now instead of just like my junior high kids, my 7th and 8th graders, instead of always asking to see Spartan Airs on the day after our concerts and the videos, they ask to see symphonic choir. They ask to see women's chorus because they sound so good, because I don't just throw everything at the show choir. And that's like, I mean, the kids still want to do Spartan Airs, but they also want to do these other choirs. So you have to make sure that you're giving everything as much equal weight as you can. Like, is the show choir going to take up more of your time? Absolutely. Right. But you can't just say, oh, well, like my kids used to be like, oh, well, can we like not do symphonic choir music today and practice Spartan Air stuff because concert's in 2 days? I'm like, no, you do Spartan Airs during Spartan Airs time. You do symphonic choir during symphonic choir time. And so like, they've definitely gotten that it's, and then some of them are like, I like symphonic choir more than Spartan Airs. So, or whatever, or treble choir more than Spartan Airs, because they're getting challenging music that is also fun for them. But they, and I do like, I do range the gamut. We do a lot of traditional, but we do some pop in the spring. So they get everything. And I think that's really important, that you have to kind of go off what you realize is best for your students, but you have to realize what is best for them is not necessarily always what you want. So.
And on that note,
and there, yeah.
I mean, I think that's so key. And this is one of the best things about this podcast medium, right? Is like having met you through Choir Baton, seeing into your program, having these conversations and just hearing your heart and hearing that reminder. I just want to thank you for vulnerably sharing with us through a takeover, through a podcast. And I don't interview everyone that goes through a takeover for a podcast, but I felt like this was a very important interview for us to do, because I can see the passion that you have for show choir, but then also the passion that you just have for people singing. And that last sentence of what you just said is so powerful. And we need to hear that from fellow educators around the country, and ultimately people around the world listen to this too. So thank you for sharing with us, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And so if people want to connect with you, or if they have questions about show choir, they can find you how and where?
Well, I'm going to pull up I don't even know my own Instagram handle, apparently. But my Instagram handle is RM Sabree. Sabree is spelled Sabree. That's my personal. I'm private, but if you want to reach out to ETC, you'll probably get my husband, but he'll forward it to me too. It's ETC Hydes School of Musical Arts, like all one long word, and Hydes is spelled Heids. So ETC Hydes School of Musical Arts. If you just type in ETC show choir on Google, like you'll find our website, and then that has like Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff.
Awesome.
But so, yeah.
And I'll link it all in the show notes as well, so people can access it that way. But I just encourage you, if you have questions, check out what Rebecca and her husband are doing. Or again, thanks so much, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Beth.
I hope that you enjoyed listening to that podcast interview with Rebecca. I will leave her information in the bio so you can go and find her on Instagram if you would like. Rebecca is transitioning to teaching at an elementary school this next year. So especially if you are someone that has done that transition and would love to talk with her, have questions about that, feel free to reach out to her, in addition to reaching out to the program that her and her husband are a part of that run show choir out in the Ohio area. And finally, don't forget, you can join the teaching membership now through the end of August 2020. And be sure you're checking out the Choir Baton website. I'll be sharing with it a little bit more about the singer course that is coming out. I am so passionate about not just helping choir teachers, but then also providing a place for adults when they leave choral programs for them to continue learning and growing as singers. And I have a free introductory course that I am trying out right now that's on the website. Even if you're a teacher wanting to see how someone else teaches online, you can go and check that out. And soon, the official first Choir Baton Singer course is going to be coming out that outlines a lot about what is happening in choir, from talking through rehearsal structures and how to read music, but also walking you through some basics that we a lot of times assume people know. But if people have not had experiences in choir before, or it's been a while, or maybe it wasn't even explained in their choral past, they can know, oh, this is why this is happening. Something as simple as like seating and arrangements and how we do it through voice parts, or talking through voice parts and what that means, talking through, understanding a little bit why we do warm-ups like we do, and so on and so forth. I'm so passionate that we can get more people singing, not through uniting as teachers that are in our classrooms, but also engaging with adult community members as well, to remind them of the importance and the beauty of singing as well. So you can check all of that out. Links will be here in the bio. My name is Beth Philemon. I'm so grateful that you are a part of More People Singing. Special shout out to my team members, Maggie Hemmedinger, who is our podcast producer, and to our social media intern, Sarah Martin. And thank you again for listening to the Choir Baton podcast.